Now, of course, we know that one of the big elephants in the room, basically in 2020, that we didn't really have in 2016 is big tech manipulation. As Professor Epstein has documented on many occasions, big tech can shift millions of votes on election day by relegating content in their algorithm. By, in the case of Google, placing certain search results above others. They've run massive tests on this, including the biggest election in the world in India, proven that it can shift millions of votes. We now see evidence of that happening again today. Big surprise, given that, of course, the Google executives were literally crying in the corridors back in 2016 and vowing to never let this happen again. Similar situation with Twitter and Facebook. Gateway Pundit reports, in 2016, Gateway Pundit was one of the top 4 pro-Trump websites on Facebook. So today, Facebook shut down our traffic to a trickle on election day. Yet another example of big tech manipulation. They say that in 2016, Facebook traffic was around 1/3 of our traffic at the Gateway Pundit. I'm sure this is similar for other conservative websites. Says today, Facebook is about 1% of our traffic. So they've literally lost about, 32% of their traffic, Facebook burying them in the algorithm on election day. Another clear example of election manipulation. And we're going to see that throughout the day with Twitter fact-checking, deleting, hiding tweets of specifically voter intimidation, as we've seen already. Meanwhile, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff tells TV news anchors military won't intervene in election. As much as the left has been planning, organizing, and calling for the military to become involved in presiding over the peaceful transfer of power if Trump refuses to leave the White House, as they're all panicking about. Well, now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff held an off-the-record meeting, this was on Saturday, with TV anchors from CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox News, in which he asserted the U.S. military will not intervene in the aftermath of the presidential election. Remember, we've got these left-wing anarchist Antifa groups openly planning on social media without getting banned to storm D.C., to drag Trump out of the White House. But now the military itself is saying that its role is apolitical. And Mark Milley also sought to dispel any notion of a role for the military in adjudicating a disputed election or making any decision around removing a president from the White House. They had a bunch of news network anchors who were involved in this call, so they vowed not to do that. But despite that, we have troops arriving in major cities in America ahead of election night. Again, this is up on summit.news. National Guard troops have been called into action. Not that most of them weren't already there anyway, thanks to peaceful BLM demonstrations. They've been called into action in several U.S. cities ahead of the election with the expectation that leftists will engage in widespread civil unrest if early indications of a Trump victory emerge. They're not boarding up the stores in Washington, D.C., in New York City, and all these other areas because they think Trump supporters are going to riot. They're boarding them up purely because of the riots that have taken place over the past 5 months, exclusively launched by BLM and Antifa, despite the fact that Michelle Obama literally got up and said that the vast majority of the protests have been peaceful. The vast majority of riots did not involve Black Lives Matter. Literally 95% of them did. Now we have troops arriving to deal with any potential fallout. Meanwhile, the final poll that Yahoo News conducted found that 77% of Americans think violence will break out after the election. 51% of voters think Trump will refuse to concede, while 77% worry that violence will break out in the coming days. And then when you look at what people will believe depending on who won, very similar situation. It found that 59% of Trump supporters believe that if Trump loses, it will be because Democrats rigged the election, while 58% of Biden supporters believe if the former VP loses, it will be because Republicans stole the election. So neither of them are going to accept the result of the election, and that only leads to one thing: massive civil dislocation and violent unrest. Can't wait for more of that, like we haven't had enough of it. Meanwhile, the most common female name for a Biden voter is, wait for it, Karen. Now, of course, this is interesting because the left tried to hijack the whole Karen meme over the past 6 to 8 months. They tried to hijack the trope and turn it into a stereotype of a typical female Trump supporter. They tried to make it out as if the typical Karen is somebody who bursts into a Walmart without a mask and then gets into an argument with the staff. They tried to make it out as if, you know, the Karen meme was this typical right-wing gun-toting Republican. Turns out the typical Karen is a left-wing Democrat, as I've been saying all along. And it's admitted in a New York Times study. The figures show that Karens are more likely to vote for Biden over Trump by a 60-40 margin. Most common female name for a Trump voter is Nancy, while the most common male name is Richard, but the most common female name for a Biden supporter is, I'm afraid, Karen. So that, once again, completely eviscerates this trope that a Karen is a angry female Trump supporter. Turns out it's actually a Biden supporter. Moving on to coronavirus lockdown news, of course, we had the announcement, Boris Johnson, in all his infinite wisdom, announced on Saturday that England would be placed under a second debilitating lockdown. They basically came out, put some graphs up, which said, if we don't lock down, 4,000 people a day are going to die. They pulled the same stunt that they always pull. They vastly over-exaggerate the death figures, announce the lockdown, and then when the death figures are below that 4,000 number a day, which they would have been anyway without a lockdown, because before the first lockdown, the fatalities were already falling before it was imposed, then they can come out and claim, well, look, there were going to be 4,000 deaths a day. There were less than that. So lockdowns work. And now we're continuing to feel the draconian grip of how this is being implemented. Corona lockdown cops quizzing people on their food purchases. Yes, once again, they're starting to inspect shopping bags. They're starting to ask people where they're going, what they're purchasing. This happened in Wales, which was already under a full lockdown before England, by the way, where cops quizzed a woman about what items she was about to purchase from a grocery store, in another example of how COVID-19 rules are being wrongly enforced. This is not in the law. This was in a village in Wales. It wasn't even in a major city. Police stopped the woman before she entered a branch of the Spar convenience store and questioned her about what she was planning to buy. The woman said police asked her where she was going before she answered that she was going to Spar to buy custard. Now we have the custard police. You're not allowed to buy custard because the cops asked if custard was an essential item, to which the woman asked, well, would you have crumble without custard? They let her go. But again, the fact is they're literally interrogating people on the street saying, where are you going? What are you buying? Of course, we had stories back during the first lockdown where people would go to a shop to buy bottles of wine because all the pubs are closed, of course, and they will be told by the police, completely outside of the law, because it's not part of it, that they're not allowed to buy wine and potato chips because they're, quote, not non-essential, they're, quote, non-essential items. We literally have police patrolling the streets. Meanwhile, you know, we have record stabbings, we have burglaries, police saying they're not even having time to attend burglaries now. But if you dare to buy custard, wine, or potato chips, you're going to be in big trouble. While in China, the origin of the coronavirus outbreak, Chinese revelers party in Wuhan nightclub while rest of Europe enters second lockdown. Yes, they're taking the piss once again. Bear in mind now, of course, that China's economy has completely recovered to pre-COVID levels, even as we prepare to enter into another debilitating lockdown, which will cause massive unemployment, massive poverty, hunger, and starvation. Well, now footage out of China shows people in Wuhan dancing in close proximity in a nightclub without face masks, even as other European countries enter into a debilitating second lockdown. So they're not wearing masks, they're having big raves, big parties. Of course, we had a similar instance a couple of months ago. Again, out of Wuhan, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak, which showed thousands of people packed together enjoying a giant pool party disco. Now, at the time when this video was released, the Chinese Communist Party heralded the video as proof that the country had achieved a, quote, strategic victory in its fight against the coronavirus. So the country in which the virus originated, some claim was deliberately released by people within that country. Their economy's completely recovered. Their population's out. They're not wearing masks. They're not social distancing. They're having massive pool parties. They're having massive raves. Meanwhile, our governments continue to pursue this disastrous lockdown policy that's proven to be completely useless, ineffective, time and time again.